Hello everyone, I'm Jacob Kaufman, I'm the nerd on the street, and today we are ripping CDs on Linux. Okay everybody, so last month my sister got me this gift for Christmas. It is the Psycho Pass 2 soundtrack, the soundtrack for both Season 2 of the show and the movie. She even got me the special edition, which comes in the cool box, and it's got an art book and everything, so I really appreciated this. It was a great gift. Both of the Psycho Pass soundtracks have some really great music on them. I would highly recommend them. However, when I sat down to actually listen to this soundtrack, I realized that I had never ripped CDs on Linux before. The last time that I ripped a CD was many years ago, and I was probably using Windows XP at the time, so I just used iTunes on that to rip it. And iTunes basically took care of everything from start to finish, grabbing the songs from the CD, figuring out what the metadata was, downloading the album art and associating that. Actually, I'm not sure if iTunes automatically did the album art. I don't think it grabbed the album art from the iTunes store. That was the only thing I had to go and download myself. But then I still used iTunes to embed the album art into the files. So that was a very easy process those many years ago. So when I sat down to do this on Linux and rip these CDs, this is 3 CDs I've got here, and I wanted to get them digitalized so I could listen to them, you know, from my phone or wherever. I was assuming it would be a relatively simple process, and then I ended up spending a whole lot of time on it. Now, I ended up with basically a working process, and that's what I'm going to show you guys today. I'm also going to explain a little bit about why it's actually so difficult to do this properly, and I'm also going to talk about a couple of pitfalls you may fall into yourself just to warn you so that you don't have those same issues. So first of all, why is it actually so difficult to rip a CD? You know, I have ripped many DVDs within the past couple of years, so I was assuming it would be a similar process to that actually as well. CDs are a digital form of media where everything is either a 1 or a 0. There's no ambiguity about what a particular sound might be. So why can't you just put it into a computer and copy the files off of it to start with, like you can with a DVD? Well, CDs, and I actually learned this in the process of ripping these CDs, CDs are not like DVDs or Blu-ray discs or even just data CDs. You know, when we're talking about audio CDs, they're actually formatted differently. When you've got a DVD with video on it, that DVD has a file system on it, and if you put the DVD into your computer, you can see the audio TS and video TS folders, and you can see the files on it that make up your DVD playback. But when you've got an audio CD, it actually doesn't have a file system. DVD players and Blu-ray disc players are programmed to be able to open up a file system and read the files off of them and play the correctly encoded video. But audio CDs are very simple, and CD players are very simple. CD players don't have any mechanism for reading files, and that's why if you're listening to a CD in a CD player and you bump the player, you've probably noticed if you do that, that the CD can skip. It can go back a couple of seconds or forward a couple of seconds, and if you're reading from a file, you wouldn't think that would really be possible, depending on your encoding and everything. CDs are actually encoded sort of like a record, where it's just one audio track physically from start to finish. And all of your tracks are going to be burned to the CD together in one continuous stream of audio. Now obviously CD players are able to skip between tracks most of the time, but they're able to do that because the CD also contains a very small amount of metadata, including the timestamp that each track starts at. So when you skip to the next track, your CD player is not actually skipping to the next track, it's just skipping to a timestamp that is supposed to be where the next track starts. So like I said, it's one continuous stream of audio going the entire way through, similar to a record. And again, that's why when you're burning a CD, your CD burner software has an option for how many seconds in between each track you want the pause to be, because your CD player is not actually pausing between tracks. That silence is actually silence that is burned into that audio stream. So that's interesting to know, but you might be wondering why I'm talking about it. Well, because CDs don't actually have much of a file system on them, when you put a CD into the computer, it can't read that CD the same way that it reads hard drives, floppy disks, DVDs, and all other storage media with file systems. All the computer can do is basically emulate what a CD player does and play back the audio stream on the CD, it can obviously read the metadata to find out where each track is supposed to start and end. But there are no files to copy off of the CD. That was the first thing that I learned in this process. CDs don't have files on them at all. Now, when I put a CD into my computer, I at first got confused, or I didn't think about the fact that there were no files, because my computer presented me in the CD with a list of files. And it actually showed me a folder full of WAV files, a folder full of MP3 files, a folder full of FLAC files, another couple other folders with other formats. And that really threw me for a loop, because I thought my CD had a bunch of copies of the songs on it. I was actually really impressed that the people making the CD went out of their way to give me all those different formats. But actually what was going on was I'm running KDE on my computer, KDE Plasma, and part of the KIO software, one of the many things that KIO does, is when you put an audio CD into your computer, KIO gives you basically a fake file system. It's a representation of your CD. It reads the metadata on the CD, and for each of the tracks, it gives you a file. And then when you try to access the file and listen to it, it plays the CD. When you try and copy the file off of the CD and onto your file system, KIO actually transcodes the audio into whatever format the file that you copied was when you make that copy. So I was seeing an MP3 file on my CD, but there was not actually an MP3 file on my CD. But if I had copied that MP3 file and pasted it onto my computer in the background would have read the CD and transcoded it into MP3 format while it was doing the copy. That's pretty neat. Now KIO doesn't really work that well. That feature does not work as advertised on my system, which, you know, I have a lot of problems with KIO in general, so that didn't really surprise me. And that's when I went looking for other CD burning software. Now, one of the other reasons it's important that CDs don't have file systems, other than navigation, is when you're doing the copy. How is that working? With digital media, with my hard drives, I'm used to being able to copy a file, paste the copy somewhere else, and basically 100% of the time, the copy that I made will be 100% identical to the original, because everything is a 1 or a 0. We're copying the 1s and 0s. You know, if the software on my computer is working properly, which it usually is, then the copy is 100% accurate. Obviously, sometimes things mess up. Sometimes cables have imperfections in them, or there's a power surge at the same time as I'm doing something, or just other irregularities occur. And that's why we have things like checksums to check to make sure that our copies are the same between the source and destination. But the software that handles file systems on my computer, the software that is enabling me to access file systems, has certain checks built into it where if something at the basic, you know, the hardware level of my hard drive, if it's reading something and there's a small error, the software on my computer is going to detect that and reread until it gets the correct data off of the hard drive. Now with the CD, there are no files. There is no file system. It's reading a raw audio stream. So what happens if there's a small power surge, or if there's some static electricity in the air, or if I bump my computer while I'm reading the CD? You know, you can bump a CD player and it skips the CD. Well, if you bump your computer while it's reading the CD, or you bump your CD player that you have plugged into your computer while you're ripping a CD, you will end up with a file with a skip in it, because your computer doesn't know how to detect that, you know, unless your desktop computer has a gyroscope or an accelerometer in it, which I'm fairly certain mine doesn't. It's not going to know that anything really happened when it was reading that CD. It's just reading raw audio data off of that CD, and whatever bits go into the reader in the CD player, those bits are what's going to be saved in the file. Once again, that is hugely different from a DVD, because DVDs have files on them. And they have, you know, file descriptors telling the computer where each file starts exactly on the DVD. Whereas the CD is a lot more guesswork. It's a lot more just go through, you know, start to finish, like I keep saying. Because of that potential for irregularity, there's something called Paranoia. And Paranoia is a library for Linux that is used in basically all of the good CD ripping software. And what Paranoia does, basically, is it reads the track multiple times to make sure that you're getting as close to what's actually on the CD as possible when you're saving a file to your computer. I'm simplifying that a lot. It's not literally just averaging together multiple reads or anything, but in layman's terms, that's what it's doing. It's reading the CD. If it thinks that something's wrong, or if it rereads a portion of the CD and finds something different than what it found the first time, it'll go back and read it again. And basically, the higher your paranoia level is when you're ripping a CD on Linux, the more confident you can be that what you're getting in your file is going to be the same as what's on your CD. So that's a little bit of background about how CDs work and about how CD ripping on Linux works. iTunes has all of the stuff I talked about built into it, so if you're on Windows or Mac OS, you can just use that or other tools. But on Linux, since everything's open source and you've got lots of options to choose from, it's good to be aware of what exactly you're doing when you're doing it. So now I want to just talk about a few of the problems I ran into after I got all of that figured out in my head and started ripping the CD. Then I'll show you how to rip the CD, and then I'll also show you how to tag it. So when you rip a CD, like I said, there's no files on the CD. You're copying the audio data off and you're saving it into files on your computer, so you have to decide what format of files you want to use. Now, I decided at first to use WAV files because WAV is an uncompressed format. Now, the quality of a CD is an interesting thing. They're normally at 44.1 thousand kilohertz sample rate. Bit rate, I don't actually know off the top of my head. What you hear on a CD might not be as high quality as the original source material when the people were recording it, but basically you have a CD and that's what you have to work with. So the goal is to not lose any further quality from your CD. You're trying to get as accurate a copy of your disc as possible. So starting with that as your starting point, uncompressed formats seems to make sense to me. That would be WAV or AIFF are the two big uncompressed audio formats, because no compression means you're not losing any quality. From a file type standpoint, from an encoding standpoint, you're getting exactly what you're putting in. That's what is saved. So that's great. You might say, I want to use WAV as my audio format. You know, it's a little bit bigger, takes up more space than compressed formats, but I want the best quality, so I'm going to use WAV. The problem with that is later, when you've got these files on your computer, you're not just going to want audio files sitting there on your desktop that you're going to double click on every time you want to listen to your music. You're probably going to be using a music player of some sort, whether it's VLC on your phone or whether it's Elisa on your computer, or Banshee or Lollipop or Rhythmbox or any of the other Linux music players available. You're probably going to be using a music player of some sort when you listen to your music if you're putting this into an organized collection like I was. That means you're going to need metadata in your files. That's called tagging your files. Metadata is data within the file that describes what's in the file. So that would be things like the song title, the artist, the album, track number, things like that. Track number is important so that your music player knows how to sort your songs. Your album art is also metadata, so if you want artwork to show up, which I do because I've talked about in the past, my #1 requirement for music players is a grid view for album art. So I am always looking at the album art of the songs that I'm listening to. That album art is stored in the file as metadata. Now, WAV files do support tagging. They can hold tags in them, but because WAV is an uncompressed format and it was not originally designed for end user use for listening to files, WAV was a format that was designed for the people making the music. And then when you distribute your music, it was expected that people would be using MP3s or WMAs or other formats that are compressed down for easier distribution. So WAV files, while they do support tagging, there is no standard for tagging the WAV files. In practice, lots of programs will let you tag WAV files, but there are some programs that will not let you tag WAV files. Some programs will read tags from WAV files and other programs won't read tags from WAV files. The particular programs that I was trying to use to tag my music were not wanting to save tags into the WAV files, and that's why I ended up switching to another format. Now that format is FLAC. Like I said earlier, one of the reasons you would want to use WAV over MP3 or WMA or M4A is because all of those other formats are compressed, which means that you're losing quality. Now, I might not be able to tell, but it's just a matter of the principle of it. You know, I don't want to lose quality from the CD when I'm digitalizing it. It should be the same quality, no worse. However, there is compression that does not reduce quality. And we can tell that because on the computer, just a quick little exercise, make a text file and then put that text file into a tar.gz archive or a zip archive and then extract it back out of that archive. Does your text file say the same thing it said when you put it in? If so, it lost no quality. It is bit for bit the same as when you put it into that compression archive. And similarly, if you put a music file or a video into a zip folder or a tar.gz archive, you're not going to lose any quality from doing that. Those archive formats are meant for archival. Those compression formats are meant for archival is what I meant to say, but just the fact that I call them archive formats, you know, they're meant for archival. They're meant to store data with a very low space footprint, but they're meant to keep the entire original data intact, so that whenever you do extract your files out of those formats, they'll be exactly the same as they were when you put them in. Now with multimedia, with audio and video, it is very common to have lossy compression formats. One big example that I have extensive experience with is video compression. I've talked before about how MP4 compression works. You know, right now, this side of my frame is not changing every frame. It's staying the same, so the video file that you're watching is actually just repeating those pixels over and over. It's not saving those pixels over again. That's an example of video compression, but of course, video compression can be lossy. If I super compress down my video, an MP4 file is going to look worse with compression settings that are set way too high. With multimedia in particular, unlike with a zip file or a tar.gz file, MP4 compression is something that a processor has to be able to decode in real time, because when you're watching a video, you can't sit there waiting for it to buffer every couple of seconds as your processor is uncompressing the data. You know, with a tarball or a zip file, you can wait a few seconds for your computer to unzip that file before you use it. But with an MP4 file, or in this case audio with an MP3 file, you don't want to have to wait when you click on an MP3 file, wait like 3 or 4 seconds or 10 seconds for your computer to uncompress that file. You want it to be quick, and you also want the files to be small. So normally there's a trade-off in compression between speed of encoding and decoding and how much you're actually compressing it, the efficiency of the compression. But when you want to achieve both of those things at the same time, you have to make compromises elsewhere, which leads to lossy compression formats. Now, I'm not going to go into that. That's a whole other tangent, and I've already been recording for way too long for this video. I know there's going to be comments of people saying I'm talking too much, but I find all of this very interesting. Getting back to the point, FLAC files are a compressed audio format that is lossless. They use a compression technique that is not as efficient as an MP3 file, so the files are going to be a little bit bigger than MP3 files. However, they are still going to be, in my experience, about half the size of a WAV file. So it's compressing where it can, using very simple, lossless compression techniques. You know, when bits are actually repeated, it can simplify down the file so that it's not taking up as much storage space on your hard drive. However, when you actually play the file and when it's decoded, it produces exactly the same sound as a WAV file would produce. And there are tools we can use to test that, just in case you can't hear the difference anyway. There are actually tools that will basically simulate playing the file, take a look at the waveforms that are coming out of it, and compare them between different files to make sure that the compression you're performing is actually lossless. I'll show you that too here in a few minutes. The point of saying all of that was, I ended up using FLAC files because they're a lot easier to tag. FLAC files, like MP3 files, are meant to be used on portable media players. They're meant to be listened to, added to collections, so it's very, very easy to put tags into them. I believe they use a similar tagging structure to MP3 files, but the important thing is that the tagging structure is standardized. There is one particular tagging structure that all programs will respect. So you can tag your FLAC files, and they should work on any good media playing device. The metadata should show up anywhere. I wanted to say that because I wanted to let you guys know, just for the people out there who are audiophiles, you can rest assured FLAC files 100% are lossless. You will not lose any audio quality converting WAV files into FLAC files. When it comes to actually doing that conversion, that's where I ran into another problem. I originally ripped my CD into the WAV format. The reason I did that is because I am a believer that programs should be written for one task and they should do that one task very well. That's part of the Unix philosophy. The program I was using to rip CDs was called K3B. It is the KDE optical media program, basically. The Swiss Army knife of CDs, DVDs, and Blu-rays. And I was using K3B to rip my CD, but I didn't want to have K3B encoding those files because I wasn't sure what settings it was using behind the scene. Now with MP3 files, that would involve what quality I'm actually getting, but with FLAC files, like I said, there is no difference in quality, but there is a difference in the actual size of the file. If you've got a more efficient FLAC encoder, you're going to get smaller files with the same quality, and if you've got a less efficient FLAC encoder, you'll have bigger files with the same quality. Obviously, there is no trade-off here other than encoding time, so you're going to want the smaller files, you're going to want to use a good FLAC encoder, and I wasn't sure what K3B was using behind the scenes, so I decided to just play it safe. I ripped the CD using WAV files. Actually, I had done that already long ago, but I wasn't about to go and re-rip the CD in FLAC after I decided to move to FLAC. I just decided to use a conversion program, because once again, we're losing no quality, might as well just use the WAV files I had already ripped and convert it. To do that, I found a couple of programs. One of them was called SOX, S-O-X. You can also just run FLAC on the command line, and that's an encoder too on Linux. But I didn't want to go through the trouble of writing a bash script to do that for every single one of my files, and I didn't want to sit there, and I had 3 CDs worth I was doing. I'm just gonna estimate off the top of my head it was like 60 tracks. So I didn't want to sit there for 60 different files and type it in manually in the command line. Like I said, I was too lazy to write a bash script. I attempted to write a bash script and I didn't know how to write the for each statement just off the top of my head. So rather than looking up how to do that properly, I decided to find a GUI program that could convert an entire directory at the same time. The GUI program I landed on was called Sound Converter, and it's based on GStreamer, and it's basically a GNOME project. I'm not sure if they're actually under the GNOME umbrella officially, but they are compliant with the GNOME Human Interface Guidelines, which basically means they're a GNOME project. The developer of that project considers that project a GNOME project. That ended up biting me in the butt. And I just can't help but laugh at the irony of I had this wild goose chase that I had all these issues tagging my FLAC files. After I made the FLAC files, Sound Converter can take an entire directory full of WAV files and convert them into FLAC files. But when I was trying to tag them, the tags were getting saved, but then they weren't being read by any of my programs. And I thought I was doing something wrong. I thought that the tagging program was doing something wrong. I thought that something somewhere, the programs reading the tags, were doing something wrong. I did not suspect that Sound Converter was what caused the issue. And of course, if there's a problem on my computer that just takes me hours to troubleshoot and I can't figure out what's wrong, of course it ends up being the one piece of this entire process that was a GNOME project that caused the issue. Of course. I fell for the simplicity meme. I went with the nice cushy GUI program to do what I wanted to do for me with not a lot of settings on the screen because it looked easy. And that ended up biting me in the butt because whatever Sound Converter does to make its FLAC files, it creates FLAC files that are problematic. I'm not going to call them broken because they do work, but they're problematic in that KDE libraries and applications cannot read the metadata from files created by Sound Converter. And I'm not going to call the KDE programs broken because they seem to be working fine when I convert those files on the command line using FLAC or SOX, or when I opened up a file in Audacity and saved it as a FLAC file. and then went and assigned tags to it, KDE was reading the metadata just fine. And you'll see what I mean here. When I say KDE, I mean my file manager Dolphin and KDE Elisa, which is the music player I use. They incidentally happen to both be KDE programs. So they use the same backend to read metadata out of FLAC files. So I was not seeing my album art in any of my programs. I wasn't seeing the title or the author show up or any of that. It wasn't just KDE either. I tried putting the file on my Android phone, which I have VLC on, and I was gonna see if my phone showed the album art. But Android file transfer, which I was using to make that transfer, Android file transfer crashed when it was trying to transfer these FLAC files. So I can't say that the files were broken definitively, but I can say that whatever GNOME sound converter was doing was producing files that were unusable for me. I wanted to give that very explicit warning not to use GNOME sound converter. And I'll show you guys the issues I was getting to here in a couple minutes. We're almost done here. Finally, the last thing I wanted to touch on, I was having so many problems getting tags to show up in KDE Elisa and Dolphin on my computer and on my Android phone. And once again, it ended up being the sound converter thing, but I spent hours and hours trying to figure out why my files weren't displaying their metadata. Now, one of the reasons why I thought maybe that was happening was because Psycho Pass is an anime, which means that it's made in Japan. And the song titles, most of them, actually I think all of them, include Japanese characters in the names of the songs. Now, I thought maybe having those Japanese characters in the file names, or maybe in the tags, or just anywhere, was causing an issue where some programs couldn't read the tags. That ended up being a red herring. The non-English characters were not causing any problems because my system, I'm running Arch Linux, and it's using a locale that was generated from UTF-8. So even though my computer is set to the English language, UTF-8 is a text encoding scheme that includes many, many, many characters and not just English characters. It does not include all Japanese and Chinese and Korean characters definitively, but it includes most of them that you're going to see on a daily basis. So as long as your system is using UTF-8 and not the 90s style ASCII, you should have no problem processing files with non-English characters. Don't bother looking into that route. I went down a wild goose chase trying to debug non-English characters on my computer before ultimately finding out that that was not the problem at all. So I've been talking for almost an hour now, and we haven't even cut to the desktop yet. Once again, sorry about this. Hopefully my regular viewers will find all of this information interesting. If you're just soaking it in, that's cool. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my CD here, and we're going to pop this thing into my computer. I'll just be showing you one of the CDs because you only need to see the process once, but we're going to put this thing in, and I'll show you guys how to rip and tag CDs in Linux. So here we go. Let's finally cut to the desktop. Alright everyone, and here we are on the desktop. I too want to kind of apologize again for that super long intro, even though I knew it was going to be like that. I'll go ahead and throw a timestamp at the beginning of this video for people who want to skip to just this how-to section. So right now I'm going to show you how to rip a CD first, and I'll show you how to just get the files onto your computer so you can play them. Then next I'll show you how to tag the files, which is a separate process, to add some metadata to them. So I'm going to pop the CD into my computer right now. And to do that, I actually need to open my tray in a terminal because my system does not like the CD player very much here. So if I run eject, that is going to eject my CD player. The tray is now open. And I have just placed the CD into the tray. Now to close the tray, I'm going to run eject-t for toggle or tray. I think it stands for toggle officially. Alright, so let's exit that terminal, and the first thing I'll show you is what I was talking about with Dolphin earlier. My system, when I insert a CD, my file manager Dolphin here offers a device that I can browse called Audio CD, and when I click on that, KIO is going to load up basically a summary of this CD. It's got one file for each track here. It's got different directories with different versions of the files. Now CDA is not actually audio, that is basically the metadata that is stored on the CD. But FLAC here, we've got MP3, I've got Vorbis, Those are all just like I said before. These aren't actually files on the CD. These are virtual representations of files. And since KIO doesn't work very well, and you can tell that it's quite slow here, it has to sit here and load every time I open up one of these directories. That's why I didn't rip the CD using just Dolphin here. That's why I used a dedicated program for it, which is K3B. So I'm going to open that up now. K3B right here. Drag it into Frame. So K3B, like I said before, is a great program for dealing with optical media on Linux. It is a KDE project. And to rip the CD, we're going to come down here in More Actions. We'll click that. We'll go down to Rip Audio CD. And that's going to load up a track list for our CD. This Load CD Info button doesn't really do much from what I can tell. Basically, all we want to do is leave everything checked and click Start Ripping, and that's going to open up a dialog box. I think that the Start Ripping button should be renamed or have a ... to signify that you're not actually starting just by clicking that button. That's just a UI quirk, which is, you know, it's a KDE program. So that's not unheard of. I'm going to create a folder in my music directory right now, and I'm going to call that folder Tutorial. So this is where we're going to rip our files to. So now in K3B, the first thing we'll do is set our target folder / tutorial right there. File type here, we're going to drop it down. Like I said before, we're using FLAC. It is lossless. Do not worry, it's lossless. You will not lose quality by using FLAC. We are going to go into the settings here. Just to show, this is the FLAC command line argument that the system is actually going to use to convert the files to FLAC when it's ripping the CD. Basically, you can see here it says force raw format, so it's inputting the stream of audio, the raw audio from the CD, putting it into the FLAC command to save it as FLAC. Indian little has to do with your CPU, I believe. You've got your channels and your sample rate set, 44/100, like I said, for CDs. Now down here you can see artist equals %A, title equals %T, track number, date, and album. I'm showing you this to let you know that you actually will get some basic metadata in these files if you rip using FLAC in K3B. Now if you rip into a WAV format, which is way up here, you can see there is no option for WAV. You can't modify the command line argument for that. And these files, which are going to be quite large as you can see, are not going to have any metadata whatsoever. It'll just be the file name and that's it. However, when you're ripping to FLAC, K3B will actually embed some metadata for you, which is what I ended up using. Later I'll show you how to touch that metadata up, how to edit it if you want to. But yeah, it is nice when you use FLAC that it does put some in for you so that you can just immediately throw it into a music player and have it be recognized with all of its sorting and whatnot. If we look under file naming, we'll see here it's going to use that metadata to name the files, which it's already giving us a preview of that up here. And under advanced, we are going to set paranoia mode to 3. Now, like I said earlier, paranoia mode has to do with how many times basically you want to read your CD. Think of it that way. That's not actually literally what's happening, but it's a good way to think about it because with paranoia mode 0, it's basically just going to read it through as best it can and save it. Paranoia mode 1, it's going to be a little slower with reading, a little more careful. There's more error checking the higher you go here. And paranoia mode 3, basically, that's the best you're going to get. This file we're creating is going to be a darn good copy of the CD with paranoia mode 3. And then read retries we'll set to 5. You can see on the log if it has to read retry, I believe. So that shouldn't be an issue unless you're actually moving your computer around while you're doing this, which you shouldn't be. So all of the options set, the main one being paranoia mode 3. We'll click start ripping and we will get a progress bar. Now this takes a while, especially with paranoia mode 3. The higher your paranoia mode, the longer this is going to take. It also does take a little bit longer for FLAC than it did for WAV because it has to compress the FLAC files into the FLAC codec, which takes a little bit of CPU power. Not a ton, but if I open up my system monitor right now, just because we have nothing else to do, you can see here, I'll move this to the side so we can see where that is relative to our percentage here in K3B. We can see in our process table, if we type in FLAC K3B is running the FLAC program to encode, and it's actually not using enough CPU to even register here. It's using less than 1% CPU on my system, even while it's running, so not using a ton. You can see for the next track it's going to spawn a new process and kill the old one. The main thing to know is that it is going to take a while, and I am going to jump cut here because, as you can see, we're only on track 3 and I've been talking for a minute or two, so don't want to make you guys sit through all that, so I'll be right back. Alright, and a good 5 minutes later, all 22 tracks have been ripped. So in my tutorial folder right here, K3B does create a subfolder for the album, and then we've got our FLAC files in here. So we can open one of these up, and it's playing. Awesome. So the first thing you'll notice here is that we do have our file names here, obviously, but there's no album art in MPV. So in order to embed the album art into the song, the first thing you're going to have to do is find the album art somewhere else. Because CDs, they do include some text information, which we can view by opening this up with VLC, actually. That's going to open up the same file. Oh, and that actually did get album art, which goes against my point. Now, there's not actually album art in the file. I do want to show you, if we go to media information here, we do have some metadata here. We've got our title, artist, album, date, and track number. Those were the 5 things that we saw in that FLAC command earlier. Now, we don't have everything else: genre, publisher, copyright. We can add those later. Under metadata here, there's no other stuff. Codec, we can see it's FLAC and all that. The reason why we have this album art is actually because VLC, in my preferences, I have it set to go out and fetch album art for songs that I don't have it for. When you start VLC up for the first time, it asks you whether or not you want to allow network access. Down here I have it turned on, so let's turn that off. I'll save it, and we'll just open this up in VLC again. Right here. Well, it's already grabbed it. Alright. It's not saved in the file. You can tell because, actually, here, no, I'll prove it. I want to prove it now that I've said it. Let me open up a terminal here. This is why my videos get so long. cd.cache lsal. Alright, let's remove our VLC cache directory. Okay. Now let's open this up in VLC. Okay, there's no album art, because it's not embedded in the file, like I said before. That's also why MPV, doesn't have network access built in at all, so none of these have album art there. So let's get that working, first and foremost. Like I said, you are going to have to get that from an outside source. Now, one thing that works well for me, I found, was Googling the album and iTunes at the end of my Google search. Find the iTunes page for this album, and we can actually just take the album art that Apple uses for iTunes, because they display it on their page here. So we'll inspect elements, and we can come down here. They're using some weird HTML structure for some reason, but down here we've got a very small copy of the image linked. We want the best resolution possible, so we'll go up here to the top one and copy this image link, the last one here. We'll copy that, we'll paste it here into our URL bar, and now we've got a super high resolution for album art, super high resolution image that you can right-click save as, and we'll go ahead and do that for demonstration. We'll navigate into our tutorial folder here, and for simplicity's sake, this is a JPEG file, which is great. That's what we want, because we want to save this as cover.jpg in our albums folder. Not sure what's going on up here with our breadcrumbs, but we're just going to save this as cover.jpg, and in here we've got cover.jpg. And after we embed this art into these files, which we are going to do, we are also going to keep cover.jpg in the folder, because some programs like KDE Elisa don't even show album art that's embedded in files. KDE Elisa and No Music and simple music players like those require a separate image in the folder. So it never hurts to just leave an extra image file in your album folders called cover.jpg. Not sure if a BNG file would work in like No Music or something, so that's why I'm shooting for this exactly. But yeah, I get my album art from iTunes. It also works well because I'm integrating this music into a mostly iTunes collection. You can also get your album art from other sources. This particular album happens to be on the video game music database, so we've got covers linked down here. This is a weird aspect ratio because it's that limited edition, and the regular entry on this website is this faded, super low resolution image that doesn't really look very good. So yeah, iTunes and Amazon work really well. You can also get it from MusicBrainz, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. For now, though, we have a copy of our album art, so that's good enough. And we're going to open up a program called Kid 3, and this is another KDE program. We'll go ahead and close K3B here because we are done with it. And we'll open up Kid 3. We'll come up to File, click Open Directory, and we'll go into our tutorial folder here and open up this directory with all our files in it. Over here in our sidebar, we'll get the 22 files we just opened, plus the cover file. So Kid 3 is a really great tagging program, super easy to use, and what we'll do is click on the top file, hold down Shift, click on the bottom file. Now we have all 22 of these selected, and then where it says drag album artwork here, we're going to go back into Dolphin, and we will drag our album art here. So that just added album art to all these files. Now you can see their icons in Kid 3 changed because they have not been saved yet, and we have made a modification to them. So once again, I should have kept them all selected, because now we're going to come up here and click Save, and you'll see the progress bar go there. Their icons update again, and now we can close Kid 3. And now you can see Dolphin has the icon for every single one of them because we just embedded that album art in the actual file. Now we can open this up again, and you can see it's got album art. And since it's nice and high resolution, MPV is bigger this time. Okay, at this point we can open this up in KDE Elisa, and which is my music player of choice, and it will show up properly. Just to demonstrate, here is KDE Elisa, and you can see here we've got Psycho Pass. I've got the first soundtrack, and then second soundtrack here was 3 discs, like I said. Right now that's showing up as 3 different albums because the FLAC metadata, if we open up VLC here, you can see the media information under album. It says disc 1, disc 2, and disc 3, so it shows up as 3 separate albums in music players. How we have it right now, and I can open this up and play it in here, and we've got album art and everything else in this program too, and it works on the Android phone, it works everywhere. So that's where I stopped, because by the time I got done with this process, like I said, I know this looked ridiculously easy how I just showed it to you, but it took me a long time to get that process ironed out, despite how simple it was and how few steps there were. So that's where I stopped. However, you might not want to stop there. You might want to keep going, and you might want to fill in some of those other metadata tags that are currently missing because the CD only has so much text on it, so K3B was only able to embed so much FLAC metadata when we were ripping the CD. So how do we get even more metadata into these files? We are going to do that by opening up a program called MusicBrainz Picard. And I'm going to open it right here, and this is what it looks like. Now, MusicBrainz Picard is an application that is a companion to a website called MusicBrainz. You can check out the MusicBrainz project at musicbrainz.org, and it's actually really cool what they're doing. They basically have a catalog of CDs, and they are basically just here to provide metadata. You can scan portions of audio and send it in and download the metadata, or you can give them partial metadata and they will complete your metadata, and you do that through client programs, one of which is Picard, which is their official client program, but they do have an open API as well, so anyone can write programs that call MusicBrainz. In fact, that might be what VLC uses for its metadata, I'm not sure. But here in MusicBrainz, we're going to click Add Folder, and we're going to come down here to Tutorial and click on our album folder. All of the files show up under unclustered files. Let me make this window a bit bigger. This is kind of a weird interface. Basically, we're going to click on unclustered files and click cluster, and it's going to put it into one cluster because it came from one folder. Simple enough. Now you can click lookup or scan. Lookup is going to send in that metadata that we do have in order to find a match in MusicBrainz. Scan is going to just ignore our metadata, but it's going to use the Acoust ID audio fingerprint, as it says. It's going to send in portions of the audio to MusicBrainz, and basically, just like that app Shazam or SoundHound, it's going to use portions of the audio to identify what tracks these are if we click Scan. I'm going to click Lookup, and it's going to say loading album information, and it finds out that we have Psycho Pass Complete Original Soundtrack 2. Now we've got a lot of information down here, and we can take a closer look at that by expanding this album. Once you look up your songs, they are going to no longer be grouped by folder, and they will be grouped by album. And the reason why that is a distinction is because this particular album happens to be a multi-disc album. Like I said, this was 3 CDs, but it was all part of the same soundtrack. So if you scroll down here, you'll see MusicBrainz puts all 3 of those discs into the same album logically. Right now, I've only ripped that first CD. Now, just for the purposes of our video here, let me go ahead, and I'm not going to sit here and wait for the other 2 albums to rip, but I'm just gonna go, oh, wrong Japanese artist name. I think I put it under compilations. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to make copies of discs 2 and 3. These are just, once again, straight rips. I did not perform any more metadata gathering or embedding on these yet, and I will make copies of those. We'll come in here to MusicBrainz, and let's load in the other 2 discs as well into MusicBrainz, just to see kind of what it's doing here. Disc 2, add folder, disc 3. Okay, and cluster, and lookup. Alright, so now you can see all of these turned green. We've got all the files on our system. Now, MusicBrainz Picard is a destructive program. By that, I mean when you save this, it is going to modify these files. You are not making copies of these files. That is a distinction that's important to make, because when I was first learning how to use MusicBrainz, it found what album these were from pretty easily because I had that old metadata in here already for it to compare to. But let me go ahead and let's remove all of these, and let me add these folders again, because I want to demonstrate what happens when Picard doesn't actually know exactly what songs you've got. Disc 3, cluster, and we're going to ignore our local metadata, and we're going to use the audio fingerprint instead. Alright, well, it didn't really work. It identified our album anyway. When I was first trying to figure out how to use Picard, I had my WAV files. I didn't have the FLAC files in here, so Picard was able to match in the MusicBrainz database our songs for the songs in the database very easily because our FLAC files already had some metadata in them. By the way, things that are different, that it's changing, are highlighted in yellow. And then things that it's adding are highlighted in green. This is nice so you can easily see what it's changing and make sure that those things that it's changing are correct. Now, when I dragged WAV files into here and I clicked lookup, it looked them up by their file names rather than any metadata. And when it tried to look them up by the file names, this is basically what happened here. This is the MusicBrainz website, and this is a release group for Psycho Pass Complete Original Soundtrack 2. Now, MusicBrainz is a very extensive database. I'm very impressed by what they're doing. When you've got that much data, things can get confusing. They've got several different entries for this same album, and they are grouped by release group. They know that this is all the same thing, but there is one entry for the regular soundtrack. There's one entry for the limited edition soundtrack. You can see the regular one has 3 CDs. I've got the one with 3 CDs plus the Blu-ray. Now, since I don't have the Blu-ray ripped yet because I haven't set up Blu-ray on Linux yet, which is another video that I'm going to have to make eventually, they thought that I just had the regular edition. If I had ripped the Blu-ray, maybe it would have identified the special edition. There are also 2 different releases on digital media with different catalog numbers here. I'm not actually sure what the differences between these are. Maybe it's the quality, because one of these says 24-bit, 48,000 kilohertz. Or that would just be 48,000 hertz, because that's what kilo means, is 1,000. So that's actually higher quality than the one I've got, because I've got the 4100, but I'm not worried about that right now. And then we've got this Korean release. So 5 different entries in their database for the same album. 4 of them don't currently have cover art available, and this one does. and if you need to override which album it's being detected as. Because like I said, when I put my WAV files in, it actually showed up several different albums. It put some of the songs into one of these, some of them into another one, based on the file names. And I wanted it to identify as the regular edition soundtrack because it had the cover art, and the limited edition does not have cover art right now. The other day, just a few weeks ago when I was doing this, I could have sworn they did have cover art. It was just, yeah, it was the wrong aspect ratio, which looked really bad in my music players. So I wanted the square aspect ratio cover art. Now there's just no cover art on this one, which I guess is better than having the wrong aspect ratio. If you want to override what album these are detected as, you can do that by coming in here, and on the MusicBrainz website, if you find your album, there's a button you can click to transfer the information from your web browser into MusicBrainz. And that's why down here we've got this saying, listening on port 8000. I'll close this unnecessary Firefox tab here. Now in Picard, I can click look up in browser. That just opened up a web page, and it added this argument to the end of the URL called tport equals 8000. Now that's going to load up and show us what it thinks the release is, and we can click here to see all the different versions of the release like I was just talking about. Now, since we opened up the website through the button in Picard, and the website knows that we are running Picard now, we get this green tagger button at the end of every line here. So let's say that I wanted to override this and let it know that I actually do have the limited edition of this, and rather than this release, I wanted to show up, you know, the barcode and everything to correctly show limited edition. What I'm gonna do is go here to the one that says 3x CD plus Blu-ray, and I'm going to click this green tagger button here. I'm gonna click that, and that's going to send that to Picard, and now we've got the album showing up here, which has 4 discs, and this is the stuff from the Blu-ray that I have not ripped. You can see what I was talking about now, that it's got this album art that is the wrong aspect ratio, so that's going to look bad in any music player, because you're supposed to have a 4:3, or a 3:4, or 1:1, whatever it is. You're supposed to have a square cover art for a CD, and this is a DVD or Blu-ray aspect ratio in terms of cover art there. Now that we have this here though, what you can do is we can take these files that it identified for the regular edition, and we can drag these down into the special edition, and it'll match them here. So now we can collapse both of these, and now we can give it the barcode and the new cover art for the special edition. And I'll go ahead and leave it like that just for demonstration purposes, actually, that it is updating these things. Right now you see the square art. So this is a way we can manually override if MusicBrainz doesn't find something. Now, like I was saying earlier, I got sidetracked. It's never a good video when I'm going on tangents. This is a destructive program. When I click save, these files are going to be modified, and there will be no way to go back. There's no Control-Z here, so when I had the WAV files, what happened was I opened up 3 folders worth of WAV files, I identified them. Now, the match percentages for these, I'm not sure where it shows that anymore. It's down here. At the end of this file name here, you see 97% match. What this 97% means is that 97% of the metadata that was present matches what we are matching it to. So this title is a 100% match. This is 100%. The album is not 100%. This disc 2 is missing, so that takes a few percentage points away from us there. Track number, this is 50% match because it was 0, 1, now it's just 1. Length is 100% match, and then date, once again, this is greater than a 0% match because the 2015 is in both of these, but it's adding the month and date of the release to the date tag here, which is actually not universally recognized. There are some tagging programs that will only let you set a year here, and they actually call this the year field, whereas MusicBrainz puts in a specific date, which is more specific but not exactly standards compliant in all cases. The green here means that this was an excellent match, and if it was a 50% match, then this would show up yellow or orange. If it's a really unlikely match, then this box will be red there. But it'll match them the best that it can based on the files that you give it and what information it has. What I did was I had my WAV files, I dragged him over here. I don't remember if it was the right album or not, but I ended up clicking save on them. Then I imported them back into MusicBrainz Picard and tried to match them again, and then it got confused. And it wasn't sure which album I was actually looking for. Now that I'm saying that out loud, I don't remember how it actually managed to confuse itself like that, because once you click save, it's going to save it with the barcode and the MusicBrainz ID, which is going to be 100% match, you know, after we save it. Just scrolling through here, by the way, you can see the slightly darker color behind this one song. That one is a 96% match. Whereas the rest of these are all 97, so that's a way you can visually tell, you know, just scrolling through, you can see which ones you might want to manually check. So right now what's happening is I'm telling you about these quirks you might run into, but MusicBrainz, or Picard, is demonstrating itself working perfectly. So power to them. Picard is a powerful program. Just a word of warning from me, be careful, because off camera when I was doing this the first time I had some issues. At this point, we're going to click save, and now we've got a green check mark over this one song. Let's go ahead and let's just select the entire album and click save. All of these files have just been saved. If we go back here into our folder, you can see we now have a messed up aspect ratio on the icons because it's using the special edition tall icon rather than the square one that we had downloaded earlier. So now if we open this up in VLC, right here, you can see it's the new album art, which is lower resolution too. You can also open this up and change it in KID 3 again now that we've put the extra metadata in, but now we can open up tools, media information, and there's not actually anything else there. All right, under metadata, here's where everything else is. Now disc number is something that I wanted to demonstrate. Like I said, I currently have Elisa set up the way that I had tagged these, or just let my system tag these. Don't judge me for my music, by the way. I've got a really weird collection. I don't always listen to everything in the collection, but I've got these showing up as a separate album per disc. That's how I had Season 1's soundtrack in here for a long time, so I wanted Season 2 to kind of match that as well. It's a cool looking album art. These all are, you know, album length things, so I'm fine with having the same icon appear 3 times. Now, what's going to happen with this, we're going to go ahead and copy this tutorial folder, and I'm going to paste it into my Elisa directory, which is right here. Compilations. And actually, I just remembered what the actual problem was and how I managed to get Picard to confuse itself. It wasn't that it was messing up its own tags, because it's a tagging program. The problem was that if we go in here, okay, so these file names right now are the exact same as they were when I ripped them, right? Yeah, the file names, this is the same file name as when I ripped these. The problems start to come in when it all just came back to me. So what happened was, like I said, I had these as WAV files. Picard was looking them up properly, but it was not saving their metadata. It was looking them up based on the file name only, because that's all that was there, because K3B was not saving any metadata. And then when I dragged them into Picard, it looked them up using the file names, and it found what they're actually called. I clicked save. Now I also, under options here, I clicked rename files and move files because I wanted it to be an organized file directory structure as if I had downloaded this from iTunes. Because once again, like the iTunes tagging and directory structure and everything, that's what the rest of my album, or most of my collection is from, is iTunes. So I wanted it just as organized as that. So I turned those options on, I clicked save. After I did that, it renamed the files, but since those were WAV files, it didn't save the tags. So then I ended up with file names that were different than what I originally had. And as you can see, these 3 folders that I had here now just have cover.jpg in them. Because Picard made this new folder here, and it moved all the files in here and renamed them. So then what I did was, when these were WAV files I was dealing with, it renamed the files, did not tag them, but just renamed them and moved them. Then I dragged them all in here again, back into Picard. It's not wanting to add them because it knows that it's already in here. But then Picard got confused because the names were different, and it was just one big mess, you know, one folder rather than the 3 separate discs that it was expecting. And that's why it was showing me some of these other options and not just the one option that I wanted like it did today. Sorry, I know I'm going on so many, this is such a long video. It confused me at the time, and it just confused me now too until I remembered what happened. So that all just comes down to saying use FLAC, don't use WAVE if you're planning to tag your media at all, okay? I could take the time to transcode these things into WAVE and reproduce the issue on screen, but since I just explained it, I don't think there's any point to doing that. At this point, we're gonna cut this and move it in here to our music directory. Now I'll open up Elisa again, and it's going to discover the new Psycho-Pass album right here. Elisa does not look at cover art that is embedded in files, so I'm going to come in here, FFmpeg, input one of these files, and cover.jpg. Alright, and that just extracted, or it converted this audio file into a picture, which just took the album art out. So now I'm going to come back to my cache directory from earlier, and I'm going to remove the Elisa directory. I'm also going to come back out here, cd into .local, and remove my Elisa database. Because Elisa, once it discovers a file, it does not like to change that file's metadata. So, alright, all of that done. If I come back in here now, if I search Psycho-Pass, you can see we've got Season 1 that I had before, Season 2 that I had before, and now this is the new one that we just added right here. This is, you can tell because it's got the different album art, and this is our 3-disc album. So in Elisa, we've got CD1, CD2, and CD3, but it's all under the same album. So you can do it either way. You can have these all show up as separate albums for each disc, or you can have one album that shows all the discs. Now, this is very nice in Elisa. The reason I didn't want to do this, aside from consistency with what I was already doing with other stuff, and these I got digitally, so I didn't have, you know, a choice there, it just was already tagged. But aside from consistency, disc numbers are another thing that is not standardized. Depending on who you ask, there are different ways that you can organize and tag multi-disc albums. Some people use disc number as the tag here. If we look at what we're actually doing, MusicBrainz here uses a tag called disc number, spelled out number, and it just uses 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever there. Some people just call that tag disc. Some programs just call it disc. Some programs call it disc number with a pound sign instead of spelling out number. Some programs would use 01 here instead of 1, or they'll put 1 out of 3 instead of 1. And then there are some people online who use disc with a K instead of with a C, and then repeat all of the above options with that spelling. When I was online looking up how people handled this situation, I found someone say something that I think is accurate. When you've got open standards, and you allow users to do whatever they want to, they will do whatever they want to. Or if you allow users to do anything, they will do absolutely anything. Which is a good thing, because if you're using some custom tag and that's working for you within your collection, that's, you know, good for you. But just for me, wanting to make sure I can open my files in as many different programs as possible and have it display correctly, Elisa in this case is displaying this CD1 relatively well. Now, Elisa does not have buttons to add one of these discs to the play queue. I can either add individual songs, I can add every single individual song one by one, or I can enqueue the entire multi-disc soundtrack, but sometimes I just want to listen to one disc here, because the CDs, they are grouped. CD1 is Season 2 of the show, CD2 is the movie, and CD3 is a collection of some things from both. So that's a reason that I like having them separated out by different albums so that I can add just one disc here to my play queue. And I also don't want to have to worry about, is my next music player going to support disc number tagged the way that I have it? Because I haven't always used Elisa. I used to use Banshee, and then Banshee went away, and now I'm using Elisa, and if Elisa ever goes away and I switch to something else, I don't know how it's going to handle this tagging So it really is just simplest for me, and in the interest of keeping the original metadata from the CD, because once again, that was what I was aiming for, was keep it as close to the CD as possible, quality-wise and metadata-wise. The CD's metadata, the text on the CD, says disc 1, disc 2, disc 3 at the end of every one of these, so that is how I'm going to keep it in my collection. Okay, and that is pretty much everything I wanted to talk about in this video. Once again, this has been a very long video. I do apologize for that. If you just wanted the tutorial, then you can stop watching now. I am going to do one last thing here, and that is demonstrate the issue I was having with GNOME Sound Converter, just to show you guys that I'm not crazy. And possibly if word ever gets around to the creator of Sound Converter, then maybe they might want to work on fixing that. So I'm going to take one of these files here. We'll use the same one we've been using all video. Actually, let's use a different one, just for something different. I'm going to go back to our tutorial folder, and I'm going to paste this here. And we're going to grab one copy of our cover.jpg file here, and then we'll delete these unnecessary folders since we don't need those anymore. Okay, so I'm going to open this FLAC file up in Audacity, and I'm going to export this as a WAV file with no metadata. The reason I'm doing this is, actually, let me do this with, rather than this copy of the song, I'm actually going to do this with the copy that I ripped and did not tag with MusicBrainz because it still has its original song title. Shouldn't matter too much, but just want to be as close to what I was doing before as possible so that this actually reproduces the issue. So I'm going to go into Audacity, I've opened this up, and I'm going to export this, like I said, as a WAV file with no metadata. We'll come in here to our tutorial folder, and we'll leave the title the same. We're going to click Save, and I've got an Edit Metadata Tags option here. Now, this was all stuff that we pulled in from the CD. K3B pulled it in from the CD and embedded it in the FLAC file for us. I'm going to clear this. I'm doing that because I'm simulating when I ripped the files as WAV in the first place in K3B. It did not save any tags to the files when I ripped it as WAV in K3B. I don't want to sit there for another 5 minutes and wait for it to rip again, so that's why I am using Audacity here to simulate that. So I'm going to exit this. So now we have a .wav file, there's no icon. Let's get rid of this FLAC file because it's irrelevant now. So pretend I just ripped this straight from the CD. It is a WAV file with no metadata. And I don't actually know if this is the original file name that K3B gave us or not, but we can see here if we open this up in VLC, it grabbed that art from the internet, so it's not actually embedded in the file. And if we go into media information, there is no metadata here. Okay. You can tell that that art came from the internet once again because Dolphin is not displaying it here. If that was embedded in the file, I would see it, you know, just like I see the little icon here for the JPEG file. We can also open it up in MPV. It's a blank screen, you see. So there's no metadata, there's no art in here, nothing. I am going to right-click on this, and I'm going to open it in Sound Converter because I'm pretending that I'm converting this to FLAC. Now, Sound Converter is it looks like a very nice program. And once again, their website completely just baited me in here. Clean and easy interface. Fast, multi-threaded conversion. Just get the job done and forget about it. That was what I was trying to do, and it ended up costing me hours because I used this program. So we've got the file in here. I had an entire directory's worth. In our preferences here, I set my settings here. We're using FLAC format, compression, better, compression, slower. That means we'll have smaller files with the same quality. We're gonna save this into the same folder as the input file here, and we'll just click convert, and you'll see it converts it. Conversion done in 1 second, and now we have a FLAC file here. We can open this up once again, still no metadata because all we did was convert it. Now we're going to open this up in Picard. So let me open Picard up again. So here's Picard and add file. We're going to bring in, first of all, let's see what the issue was with WAV that I was talking about in Picard. We're gonna cluster this file here. Cluster. All right, it doesn't want to cluster it. Look up. Okay, it looked it up. It placed it correctly in the soundtrack in the album. We've got a 99% match rate because all it had to go on was the title, which it got, not from any tag, but it got from the file name. So it literally just searched. You can see it included the hyphen in the old title, right here, and then the new title is almost exactly the same. Now we still have this set to rename and move files, so when I click save here, it's going to act like it saved all of this information. And if I come out here into my folder, you see it moved that WAV file out of this tutorial folder. It moved it into this folder here, but you see there's no icon here, there's no art, and if I open this up in VLC, there is still no metadata under media information because it's a WAV file. So Picard was not only failing to write metadata to a WAV file, but it was silently failing. It was acting like everything was perfectly fine. And now, what had happened basically at the very end of it all was when I went back into Picard after realizing that there was no metadata in here, and I dragged the WAV file in again, cluster, and look up, wait for it to go through here, cluster, look up. I mean, it's not looking it up. You can see right now I'm clicking look up, and it's not finding anything because it renamed this file. And actually what it did was it added information to the file because before we had 02, track 2, and just the song name. And now we've got disc 1, track 2, the artist, and then the song name. But having that extra information, you know, when it's searching its database, it thinks that this is just one field. Once again, before it thought that this hyphen was part of the song name, and now it thinks that this entire thing is supposed to be a song name, when in reality, this is not part of the song name. So it's searching too much information in one field in its database, and it's not able to identify this anymore. So then I had to go and actually re-rip my CDs. I decided that would be easier than trying to manually one by one rename the files and have it properly identify them. But if I do rename this to just the song title, and we drag this in again, cluster, if I click look up now, okay, so we've got one of these, the track that I had renamed, it has as an excellent match, green. The track that I did not rename is a yellow because it's not a very good match. And if I go back here and if I just drag this in one more time, look up, yeah, it's failing to look that up with the modified file name. So be careful with Picard for that reason. Now we are going to come back over here to our tutorial folder. This is the FLAC file that Sound Converter created. So we're going to come into Picard again. And in Picard, we are going to drag this in here, cluster, look up, and it is going to find it because, you know, it's got that title. We're going to click save, and since that's a FLAC file, it's going to successfully save. We'll come back out here to our music folder. This is where it moved it to, and this is the FLAC file here. Now, I just said that it was going to successfully save the tags. Did I lie to you? Because there's not currently art here, just like there's not art on our WAV file. But there is metadata in here. If we right-click this, actually, let's just open it in MPV while there's no art there. If we right-click this and open it in VLC, codec information, metadata. Okay, so we've got tags in here. We don't have art, but we do have tags. Metadata is all right here. So it saved that, but as you can clearly see, Dolphin is not recognizing, well, neither is VLC. Here, let me open this in KID 3, and let's manually put the art in here, just like we did in the working process we had before. So I'll come back out to tutorial. I hope you're still following along with what I'm doing here. So let's embed into our FLAC file, save that art. I just closed out of all of my Dolphin windows. Great. Come back here into music. Okay. Now if we open this up in MPV, there is art here because we just manually embedded it in KID 3 and it worked. But Dolphin is still not displaying it. And if we open this up in Elisa, Elisa doesn't display artwork for this. You can see it's playing the song. It doesn't know what the name of the song is. It's just showing me the file name up here. And if I search Psychopass, even though this has been added to Elisa, it's not showing up under that search because it doesn't know what album this is a part of. So now we're going to take this FLAC file, we're going to open it in Audacity, right? Okay. So I just opened the FLAC file in Audacity. We're going to export it as a FLAC file, exact same format. We'll call this one fixed save. And we're going to keep the metadata in here that we are exporting, keep the tags, okay? But this is our fixed version, so if we open this up in KID 3, and it's currently missing album artwork because Audacity just resaved the file. So the only metadata that it has is what Audacity imported, and Audacity does not work with album art. So we're going to drag this album art in here and click save, and now it's back to working, because that was a file created by Audacity and not by Sound Converter. So there's a little magic trick demonstrating that this simple little program is actually a demon that is going to steal hours of your time as you try to track down this issue. I did take a look. You can see how many tabs I had open from this project. I took a look at the bug list for Sound Converter, and there are a number of bugs open for Sound Converter. You know, some of them are tagged in their bug tracker and some of them aren't. I did not find a bug that specifically referenced this issue, but I also didn't look for too long because once I figured out what the issue was, I just wanted to be done with the whole thing. So that was what I was talking about with Sound Converter. I gave you a fair warning before that I was about to go on one final tangent, so that was not part of the tutorial at all. But that is everything, absolutely everything definitively that I know and or wanted to tell or show you about ripping CDs on Linux. Hey, if you have any questions about this process, I know it was a lot of information. If you do have any questions at all, you can head on over to the forums at nerdonthestreet.com. You can see I've had some people talking in there fairly recently asking me questions about other stuff. I'd be happy to help you guys walk through any problems you got, or discuss how you keep track of your digital music files. Also, if this video helped you at all in any way whatsoever, I would really appreciate it if you would consider joining the Nerd Club. Basically, it's supporting me on Patreon for $3 a month, and by doing that, you can help me make more videos like this one. We're currently working our way up to being able to pay for the web servers and everything with nothing but our Nerd Club membership, so yeah, if you want to contribute to that, nerdclub.knots.co is the website to go to. For now, though, thanks for sticking with me. I'll let you guys go. I'm Jacob Kaufman, I'm the Nerd on the Street, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.